Warning: this content may be unsuitable for viewers under 18 years of age or those who are sensitive to fear, disturbing content, or psychological horror. If you are under 18 or easily frightened, please do not watch. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. The Flash Drive. There are moments in life that feel completely ordinary until they aren't. Until something small, something forgettable, cracks open and reveals something underneath that you were never meant to see. This is one of those moments. I want you to think back to your senior year of high school, the smell of the cafeteria, the sound of lockers slamming, the particular exhaustion of dragging yourself through the last stretch before graduation. Now I want you to think about one person, someone you barely knew, someone who sat at the edge of every room and never quite belonged to it. Someone whose eyes, when they accidentally met yours, made you feel like you'd stepped into a cold room without warning. Now, imagine that person disappeared, and imagine they left something behind. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that this happened and that I've spent years trying to decide what it meant. And I still don't have an answer. It was my senior year at a public high school in western Pennsylvania. I was in the computer lab during a free period working on a Java assignment for my programming class. The lab was mostly empty that afternoon, just the hum of old monitors and the smell of dust burning on overheated processors. I'd chosen one of the two machines in the back corner because they had the right software installed. A minute after I sat down, someone pulled out the chair beside me. I knew who he was, the way you know the weather. You notice it without really thinking about it. He was tall, unusually pale, with dark hair that fell across one side of his face in a way that seemed less like a style choice and more like a curtain he'd pulled shut. He wore a military surplice, jacket covered in patches from bands I vaguely recognized, heavy boots that scuffed against the tile, and an expression that suggested he found the entire world mildly offensive. I had never seen him talk to anyone. Not once. Not in 2 years of sharing hallways and classrooms. I sat down. He looked up. I want to be clear, it was not a glance. It was not even a stare. It was the kind of look that makes you feel briefly like a trespasser, like you've wandered into someone's private space without a map. I looked away immediately and started digging through my backpack with the focused energy of someone who absolutely had somewhere else to be. While my head was still down, I heard him laugh. It was barely a sound, more like air escaping, a low exhale with a shape to it. And then, quietly, in a voice that wasn't quite talking to me and wasn't quite not, "Of course." I kept my eyes in my bag for another few seconds. Then I sat up, typed in my login credentials, and, because silence felt worse than speaking, I said, "She assigns way too much. I can barely keep up." He didn't look at me. His eyes stayed on his screen. Then, "You want the answers." Not a question, a statement, like he'd already filed me under a category. "No," I said, and I meant it, not because I was above cheating in general, but because I genuinely did not want to see that look again. There was something in his eyes that I can only describe as weight, like he'd been watching things for a very long time. He laughed again, that same low, strange exhale. I looked over. His chair was empty. He was just gone. No sound of him standing, no scrape of the chair, just gone. And there, next to the keyboard, was a flash drive. Small, silver, the kind that folds out from a casing designed to look like a multi-tool. It looked like something you'd find in a specialty shop, the kind of object that costs more than it should, and somehow communicates that its owner has very specific tastes. I waited 10 minutes. Study hall ended at 1, and by 12:50 I'd accepted he wasn't coming back. I picked it up, dropped it in my jacket pocket, and told myself I'd return it the next day in programming class. He wasn't there the next day, or the day after that. His absence wasn't unusual. Everyone knew he skipped constantly. But 1 week became 2, and 2 became a month. By the time May arrived and the rest of us were filling out graduation forms and signing yearbooks, I had almost completely forgotten about him. Almost. I came back home 2 weeks ago for a family matter, a funeral, the kind that brings you back to a place you thought you'd moved past. I was in my old bedroom, looking for a flash drive I could use for a presentation, and I remembered. The little silver multi-tool was exactly where I'd left it, in a small wooden box on the shelf above my desk. I plugged it into my laptop and ran a scan. Clean. I opened the File Explorer, intending to wipe it and start fresh, and that's when I stopped. There were 4 folders. The first was labeled Computer Science. I opened it. Every assignment from our senior year, completed and organized by date. All the answers, all the work. He had done everything, every problem, every project, and he'd left it on a drive he then abandoned next to a computer he knew I was using. The second folder was labeled Music. Inside were 3 audio files. Running on Empty by Jackson Browne, White Rabbit by Jefferson Airplane, Helter Skelter by the Beatles. 3 songs, that's all. No playlist, no folders within folders, no evidence of any other musical interest. Just those 3. The third folder was labeled AP Literature. Inside were essays, decent ones, actually, and one document called simply The Best. I opened it. It was a scanned image of notebook paper. 10 pages, and on every single line of every single page, in careful, deliberate handwriting, was his full name, over and over and over again. His first name, a space, his last name, a period, first name, last name, period, hundreds of times, possibly thousands. I closed the document. The 4th folder had no name at all. I sat there for a moment before I opened it. Inside were photographs. The first set were pictures of emergency exit diagrams, the kind posted on the back of every classroom door, the ones no one ever looks at. He'd photographed every single one in the school, every classroom, every hallway, every stairwell, documented, archived. Then, a photograph of a lit cigarette on the floor of what I recognized as the 2nd-floor boys' bathroom. The cigarette was balanced upright against the base of a urinal, still smoking. That photograph had been taken with precision, framed, deliberate. Then, a photograph of a small pile of coins on a bathroom floor. Next to the coins, a yellow sticky note. On the note, in block letters, chump change. And then, the last photograph. It was me. I was sitting at a desk in what I recognized as my English class. I was reading. My head was down, my hair falling forward slightly, one hand on the page. The angle suggested the photo had been taken from somewhere near the door, or possibly the hallway window. It was in focus. It was not blurry or accidental. It was a photograph taken of me, in a class he was not enrolled in, at a time when I had no idea I was being watched. There was one more file, a document titled Rest in Peace 2. I opened it. It was empty. I have no way of knowing what any of this means. I have no way of knowing if he planned to leave that drive behind, or if losing it changed something, or if it was all an elaborate joke I was never meant to understand. I've looked him up since. I found almost nothing. A yearbook photo, a listed address that turned out to belong to someone else. What I do know is this. Whatever was on that drive, he carried it around with him. He organized it. He kept it. And then one day he sat down next to me, laughed at something I couldn't hear, said, "Of course," and walked away. He never came back. I still have the drive. I don't know why I can't throw it away. The basement. Some fears make sense. A strange sound in the dark, a shadow that moves wrong, a door that opens by itself. These things scare us because they should. They're the mind doing its job, scanning for danger, sending up a flare. But there's a different kind of fear, the kind that doesn't announce itself until you're already in the middle of it, the kind that hides inside something that felt completely normal until the exact moment it didn't. This is that kind. My name is Lauren. I'm 21 now. When this happened, I was 12 years old, and my best friend since second grade, I'll call her Cassie, was sleeping over on a Friday night in late October. Cassie and I had been obsessed with the paranormal since we were old enough to stay up past 10. We'd watched every ghost hunting show available on cable. We had a whole system. One of us would carry a voice recorder, a cheap flip phone set to audio, and the other would hold the video camera, a touchscreen camcorder my father used for family vacations that we'd borrowed from his desk drawer without asking. We'd done maybe a dozen of these investigations across our houses, her grandmother's place, a supposedly haunted trail near the middle school. We never found anything, but we also never really looked that hard. The ritual mattered more than the result. That night felt different from the beginning. Maybe it was the time of year, the particular quality of October darkness, the way sound carries differently when the leaves are off the trees. Maybe it was the house itself. My family's house was built in the early 1900s, and it had never quite been updated to match the century it now existed in. The basement especially felt like something from a different time. Unfinished stone walls, a single bare bulb at the base of the stairs, and 3 rooms separated by narrow doorways. The first room was storage, cardboard boxes, furniture we no longer used, the accumulated weight of a family's memory stacked ceiling high. The second room held the washer and dryer and smelled permanently of detergent and old water. The third room, the one at the very back, through a second doorway, was a small square space that had no clear purpose. No shelving, no light fixture, no furniture. Just a concrete floor and walls, and the particular silence of a room that has been empty for a very long time. No one went into that room. Not my parents, not my older brother, not the neighbors who occasionally helped us move things in and out of storage. If anyone's gaze landed on that doorway, they moved on quickly, without comment, in the way people do when they've silently agreed not to acknowledge something. At around midnight, Cassie and I took the camera and the voice recorder downstairs. We ran through our standard protocol. We stood in the center of the storage room, held our equipment up, and asked the questions we'd memorized from television. Is there anyone here? Can you give us a sign? We mean no harm. We moved into the laundry room. We stood at the entrance to the back room and aimed both devices into the darkness without going in. We asked our questions again. We waited. Nothing happened. We went back upstairs. For the first viewing, we sat on my bed and played the footage back on the camera's small screen, shoulder to shoulder, the volume turned up. We watched ourselves standing in the storage room, looking serious and slightly ridiculous. We listened to the audio for footsteps that weren't ours. We found nothing. We weren't even that disappointed. The act of watching ourselves felt like enough. We played board games for a while. Sometime around 2 in the morning, half asleep and restless, Cassie suggested we watch the footage again. Maybe we'd missed something. I rewound to the beginning and pressed play. The first few minutes looked exactly the same as before. Then something shifted. I don't know how to explain it except to say that we both felt it before we saw it. A change in the quality of the footage, a kind of pressure in the air of the recording, the way a photograph taken in a room with something wrong in it carries that wrongness in the image even when you can't identify the source. We both leaned forward at the same time. The footage continued. Cassie appeared on screen. The camera had been pointed at her while she asked her questions, her face lit faintly by the single overhead bulb. She was looking straight ahead, speaking into the dark, and behind her. I have described this to 3 people since it happened. 2 of them didn't believe me. One of them watched the footage on my phone, handed it back, and didn't speak for about 30 seconds. Behind Cassie, in the laundry room doorway, was a figure. It didn't look fully human. It was approximately human-shaped. The proportions were almost right, but something about the geometry was wrong, the way a reflection in warped glass is almost right, but wrong enough to make your body react before your mind does. It was dark in the doorway. The figure was darker than the dark around it, and its eyes, 2 points of pale, almost white light, were fixed directly at the camera. Not at Cassie, at the camera, at whoever would later be watching. Cassie grabbed my arm. I stopped the footage. We sat in my room in the specific silence of 2 people who have just watched something they cannot explain and are not ready to speak about it yet. My father was asleep. It was nearly 3 in the morning. We made the mutual, unspoken decision not to wake him, not to tell anyone, not to discuss it beyond the first few fractured sentences we exchanged in the dark. We left the lights on. We did not sleep. We did not go back into that basement. Not that night, not the next morning, not in the months that followed. I eventually told my mother, who listened carefully and then suggested it might have been a shadow from the dryer. I showed her the footage. She watched it twice and then said she needed to start dinner. Cassie and I are still close. We talk about it sometimes, carefully, the way you talk about something that still has edges. Some nights it comes back in the particular way of something that never fully resolved, rising up between sleep and waking. I still think about those eyes, still think about how they were looking at me. Halloween at Ridgeline Park. There are places where the line between safe and unsafe is invisible until you've already crossed it. Places where the geography itself seems to attract a certain kind of danger, not supernatural, not imaginary, but human. And human danger, when you are close enough to feel it, is the most terrifying kind. My name is Marcus. I grew up in a small town in rural Ohio. I'll call it Grayfield, about 40 minutes from the nearest city. It was the kind of town where everyone's name had a face and most people's histories were already written before they finished high school. Grayfield had 1 grocery store, 1 diner, and 1 park. Ridgeline State Park, 150 acres of hiking trails, a small fishing lake, and a reputation. Everyone who grew up in Grayfield knew about Ridgeline's reputation. It was spoken about the way these things always are, in low voices, in fragments, as a kind of warning delivered without full specifics. There had been incidents. The park was isolated enough and attended irregularly enough that people with bad intentions had learned to use it. Most of us knew this in the abstract. We went anyway because it was the only real outdoor space for miles, and because we were teenagers, and teenagers are very good at knowing about danger without quite believing it applies to them. I had spent hundreds of hours at Ridgeline by my senior year, biked its trails, fished its lake, set off fireworks in the backwoods with my friends on summer nights. I had good memories of that park, more good than bad. I want that on the record. What happened in October of my senior year did not erase those memories, but it set itself down on top of them, and now I can't quite see them without seeing it too. I had joined the Ohio Army National Guard the previous summer and was training seriously for basic. That fall I was running trails 4 or 5 days a week. On Halloween afternoon, it was a Wednesday, school had let out early, I texted my best friend Ian and asked if he wanted to run Ridgeline with me after I dropped off my younger brother at our neighbor's house for trick-or-treating. Ian said yes. I drove to the park alone first and pulled into the north lot, which was mostly empty at 4 in the afternoon on a weekday. I was stretching by my car when I noticed the other vehicle. It was an older silver sedan, parked at the far end of the lot. The man behind the wheel was perhaps 60, heavy-set, completely bald, with the kind of stillness that doesn't read as relaxed, but as something held in deliberate check. He wasn't reading. He wasn't on his phone. He was just sitting there, watching me. I've thought a lot about how to describe that stare. It was wide-eyed and fixed, and completely without the flicker of self-consciousness that normal eye contact involves. There was no acknowledgement that he knew I could see him watching, no instinct to look away, no performance of innocence. He looked at me the way a person looks at something they are deciding about. We made eye contact. He nodded, a slow, deliberate dip of his head, the kind of gesture that could have been friendly and was not. I nodded back, reflexive, automatic, and looked away. When I checked again, peripherally, he was still watching. I got back in my car. I pulled out of the lot at normal speed and drove to the high school, where I called Ian and told him to meet me there instead. My stomach was already wrong in the way it gets wrong when your body has assessed a situation before your brain has finished processing it. 10 minutes later, Ian pulled into the high school lot. I started to walk toward his car. My phone buzzed. A text from Ian. "Here." I looked up. His car was parked in the second row. 2 spaces away, engine running, windows up, engine running, was the silver sedan. I don't know how he found us. I don't know if he'd followed me at a distance, if he'd guessed, if it was coincidence that I have never been able to fully accept as coincidence. What I know is that he was there, in a school parking lot on Halloween afternoon, and he was still watching. I walked to Ian's window, kept my back to the silver car, told Ian in a low voice what had happened. We decided to take separate cars to the south lot of Ridgeline, the less used entrance, farther from the main trailhead, and try to lose him. He followed us there, too. We parked and moved quickly down the hill toward the trailhead before he'd finished parking. From the slope, we could see him driving slowly through the lot, windows down now, head moving from side to side, looking for us. We were below his sight line, the grade of the hill put us below the lot's horizon, and he couldn't find us. We waited 15 minutes. Then we watched the car circle twice more, pause, and finally leave the lot. We were athletes. We knew that. We were both in our best shape, both reasonably trained, and there were 2 of us. We made the decision to run the trail anyway. I picked up a rock from the ground at the base of the trail, a solid piece of sandstone about the weight of a warm softball, and held it for the first mile. Ian didn't comment on this. We didn't see the man again that day. But I ran that trail looking over my shoulder the entire time, and the rock felt both completely inadequate and absolutely necessary. And that combination of feelings is one I've never forgotten. I'm 24 now, finished my service obligation, finishing my degree. When I go back to Grayfield to visit my parents, I sometimes drive past Ridgeline at night, not to be reckless, not to tempt anything. I think I do it because I want to see it on my own terms, to look at it and know that I'm choosing to be there, that I'm armed, that I'm paying attention. But I always lock my doors before I drive past, and I always check the rearview mirror. The closet. The last story I want to tell you is the one that took me the longest to talk about. Not because it was the most dramatic, not because anyone was hurt, but because of what it means. What it implies about the particular vulnerability of being in the one place in the world where you are supposed to be safe. What it says about the way a feeling of security can be manufactured, maintained, sustained for months or years without being real. My name is Jess. I'm 26. I grew up in a 2-story house in suburban Maryland, the kind of neighborhood where everyone's front yard is neatly trimmed, and the worst thing that usually happens is a package getting stolen off a porch. Safe, quiet, boring in the way that, when you're young, feels permanent and oppressive, and that, looking back, you would give almost anything to return to. My bedroom was at the end of the second-floor hallway. It was a good room, big windows, enough space, a reading nook I'd put a lamp and a small shelf in. The only thing unusual about it was the storage closet. Most bedroom closets have doors. This one didn't. Not a standard door with hinges and a knob. Instead, the opening was covered by a large square panel of painted drywall that had been cut out during a renovation years before and never properly replaced. It fit snugly into the opening when pressed flush against the wall. To open it, you grabbed the edges and lifted it free. To close it, you set it back in place. No latch, no lock, nothing holding it in but friction and fit. I was 19 the first time the panel fell out on its own. I woke up one morning and found it leaning against the wooden frame of my bed, the closet open behind it. I assumed the fit had loosened. The house settled periodically. The walls shifted slightly with the seasons, and I pressed it back into place without much thought. It happened again 3 nights later. I woke up at 4 in the morning to find it open again. This time I examined the edges carefully and concluded that the drywall had warped slightly, that it no longer sat as tightly as it once had. I decided to leave it open rather than keep fighting it. I'd fix it properly on the weekend. I never made it to the weekend. 2 nights later, I was lying in bed at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep. Nothing unusual about that. I've always been a light sleeper, always taken a long time to wind down. I'd been lying there for maybe 2 hours, listening to the house settle, watching the ceiling. Then I heard it. A thump. Dull, heavy, deliberate. I knew what it was. The panel had come free again. I could see it in the dark. The square opening of the closet, the panel now propped against the foot of my bed. I closed my eyes. I told myself to deal with it in the morning. I told myself it was just the house. Then I heard the plastic bag. There is a specific sound that a plastic bag makes when it is touched, a light, papery crinkle, dry as a held breath. There were plastic bags in the closet, bags of old clothes, of winter things I didn't use in summer, of items I'd put in there without sorting and then forgotten. The sound that came out of the dark was quiet. Almost nothing. But there was no draft in my room. The windows were closed. I had checked them before getting into bed, the way I always did. I lay still for approximately 3 seconds. Then I turned on the light. I looked into the closet. There was a man inside it. He was pressed into the back corner, and he was looking at me. He had the hollow, desperate look of someone who knows they've just been seen and hasn't yet decided what to do. It lasted maybe half a second. Then he tried to move behind a stack of bags, a gesture that was simultaneously an attempt at concealment and completely futile, since I had already seen him, was already looking directly at him, had seen his face. I screamed, one word, "Dad." I screamed it loud enough that I felt it in my chest. My father was down the hall. He was in my room in under 10 seconds. I pointed at the closet. He looked at me, the expression of a person calibrating the gap between what they're being told and what they can bring themselves to believe. And then he looked at the closet. He crawled all the way in, moved the bags, checked every corner. He came out alone. He told me I must have been dreaming or half asleep or imagining something in the dark, the way people do when they've been awake for 2 hours and their eyes are unreliable. He said it gently, with the particular care of a parent who is not dismissing you, but genuinely believes they are correct. I didn't argue. I got up, took my blanket down the hall to my parents' room, and lay down on the floor. I wasn't going to sleep. I knew that. I lay in the dark with my blanket pulled up and my eyes open and waited for whatever came next. 20 minutes later, I heard my bedroom door open. It was down the hall from where I was lying. The sound was unmistakable. The specific creak of that particular door, a sound I'd heard 10,000 times, a sound as familiar to me as my own name. It opened. There was a pause of maybe 2 seconds, and then the sound of someone running. Down the hall. Down the stairs, fast, heels hitting hard on each step, through the front hallway. The front door opened with a crash that shook the frame and slammed shut behind them. Both my parents sat up. My father was out of bed before the echo faded. My mother turned on the light and looked at me on the floor, and finally, in the particular tone of a person who has just had their calibration corrected, said, "Oh my God." We searched the immediate vicinity. We found nothing. No car, no footprints in the dark, no one anywhere on our street who looked like they'd just run out of our house at 2:45 in the morning. What we found the next day, in daylight, an old plastic storage container in the back of my closet, pushed behind a rack of coats. The container was large enough to hold a person sitting with their knees up. The lid had been replaced, but not sealed. Inside were the clear signs, compression marks, a faint smell, of occupation. He had been living in my closet. We still don't know for how long. We don't know how he got in, though a window in the basement laundry room had a broken latch that my father had been meaning to fix for months. We don't know if he had been there every night or only some nights, or how many times he had listened to me sleep without me knowing. We installed a security system the next week. I put a lock on my bedroom door. I moved the bed away from the closet wall. I lived in that house for 2 more years. I never slept easily again. Every night before getting into bed, I checked the closet. First the panel, then inside, then the container at the back. Every single night. Some fears make sense because something real is there. And once you've felt that kind of fear, the kind that turns out to be correct, the ordinary dark of your own bedroom never quite looks the same again. The signals you miss. There's a thing that happens after you hear stories like these. You start reviewing your own life for the moments you didn't notice. The person in the parking lot you made eye contact with and then forgot. The sound you heard at night that you explained away before it finished. The object that wasn't quite where you left it. The feeling, brief, dismissible, that you were not alone. Most of those moments are nothing. The mind is a pattern-seeking machine, and it will find shapes in noise if you ask it to look long enough. Most creaking houses are just settling. Most sounds in basements are pipes or mice or the mechanical breath of old appliances. Most strangers who watch you in parking lots are looking past you at something else, but not all of them. The flash drive sat in a box for years before its owner disappeared into silence. The footage from a 12-year-old's ghost hunt captured something neither girl could explain. A man in a silver car followed 2 teenage athletes from lot to lot on Halloween afternoon, with intentions no one ever confirmed but no one needed to. And in a bedroom in suburban Maryland, a woman discovered that her sense of safety had been a story she'd been telling herself, had been telling herself every night for an unknown number of nights, while someone listened from inside the wall. These stories share something. Not a location, not a villain, not a genre. What they share is the gap between what felt true and what was. The story we tell ourselves, this is safe, this is normal, this makes sense, and the moment the story breaks. That gap is where fear lives. Not in monsters, not in the dark itself, but in the revision. In the moment when something you thought you understood becomes something you have to re-understand from scratch. Think about the girl who picked up a flash drive and carried it home, thinking she was doing a small kindness for a strange boy who would probably come back for it. Think about the photograph inside it. Think about the document titled, "Rest in Peace to," with nothing in it. Think about what it means that those things existed on the same drive, organized in the same folders, carried in the same pocket, and left behind deliberately. Or not. That's the part that keeps returning. The uncertainty. The way the story refuses to resolve. The way the boy walked away and never came back. And the question of whether that was a choice or a necessity remains permanently, structurally open. Think about the footage from the basement, the figure in the doorway with the wrong proportions and the pale, watching eyes. Two 12-year-olds sitting in the dark, the footage playing on a small screen, the moment the camera turned and showed them what was standing behind them, the way neither of them slept, the way they made an unspoken agreement not to talk about it, the way that agreement is held for years, the way it sometimes breaks at 2 in the morning when one of them texts the other, and they both know, without saying it, what the message is really about. Think about Halloween afternoon in a state. Park in rural Ohio. 2 athletes, 2 cars, 1 rock that weighed about what a softball weighs, and a man who followed them from lot to lot without apparent hesitation or apparent concern that they could see him. Think about the nod he gave, that slow, deliberate nod, and the particular intelligence it implied, the knowledge of what he was doing, the intention behind it. Think about the container in the closet, the compression marks, the smell, the fact that the front door slammed shut at 2:45 in the morning as a man who had been living inside someone's home ran out of it and into the dark and was never identified. The fact that the woman on the floor of her parents' room heard him open her bedroom door, pause, and run. That pause. 2 seconds. What was he doing in those 2 seconds? What did he see when he looked into the room and found it empty? What did he decide? Fear is information. That's the thing people forget. Or maybe it's the thing they're never told, directly. Fear is the body saying, "Pay attention. Something here is not right." It evolved alongside us for a reason. The instinct that made Marcus pull out of that parking lot, that made him pick up a rock at the trailhead, that made him check the rearview mirror, that instinct was correct. The feeling was not paranoia, it was data. The 2 girls in the basement, they felt it before they saw it. On the second viewing, they said, they could feel something wrong in the footage before they identified the source. That's not imagination. That's the nervous system doing its job, pattern matching against a baseline, registering deviation before the conscious mind has words for it. And Jess, who woke up night after night to a panel that kept falling open, who heard a plastic bag crinkle in a room with no draft, who turned on the light and looked directly at the thing she'd been afraid of finding. Jess, who trusted her own perception even when the person she loved most in the world told her she was wrong, even when she briefly started to question herself, was right. She was right. The cost of being right about these things is high. We know that. But the cost of being wrong the other way, of overriding the signal, of convincing yourself the fear is irrational, of pressing the closet panel back into place and going back to sleep, that cost is higher. Pay attention. Lock your doors. Check your closets. And if someone in a silver car makes eye contact with you in a parking lot and nods like he knows something you don't, leave. Don't wait. Don't second guess. Don't try to seem reasonable. Just leave. One more thing. I've been thinking about the flash drive. Not the photographs, though I think about those too. not the document with only a name, written hundreds of times in careful handwriting, though that image surfaces regularly in the specific ungoverned space between being awake and being asleep. I've been thinking about the songs: Running on Empty, White Rabbit, Helter Skelter. There's a logic to those three songs that I've spent more time with than I probably should have. Running on Empty is a song about movement without destination, the road as an end in itself, the act of going as a substitute for arriving. White Rabbit is about following something down into a place where the rules are different, where scale and proportion are wrong, where what seems like it should be frightening somehow isn't, and what seems safe is where the real danger lives. Helter Skelter is about what it sounds like: chaos, acceleration, a thing that starts controlled and gets away from itself. 3 songs. On a drive also containing every completed assignment for a class he attended sporadically and a 10-page document of his own name written over and over until the pages were full. I've also been thinking about the photograph of me. I've tried to remember how I looked in my English class, whether I ever looked up at the door, whether I ever felt watched in a way I dismissed, explained, set aside. I don't remember anything. That might be the most unsettling part, that the evidence suggests I was being observed with some regularity, and I have no memory of sensing it at all. There are other things I've tried to remember, too. Moments I might have noticed him and didn't. Hallway encounters, cafeteria sightings, the brief geography of shared spaces in a building where our paths must have crossed. I can reconstruct 3, maybe 4 actual memories of seeing him before that afternoon in the computer lab. After that afternoon, nothing. He was simply absent, from school, from the record, from anything traceable. A few months ago, I went back to my hometown and visited the old library where I'd done research as a kid. I looked through the archived local papers from that year. Nothing. No incident, no accident, no police report that I could find with his name attached to it. No obituary, just absence. I still have the drive. I've thought about throwing it away more times than I can count. I've thought about what it means that I haven't, whether keeping it is a form of respect for something I don't understand, or whether it's something less defensible, a kind of fascinated clinging to the unresolved. I've also thought about the title of that last file. Rest in Peace 2, not 1. The ellipsis after it, like a thought interrupted, like something that wasn't finished. I've never opened it again. The file is still there, still empty as far as I know. I tell myself that's as far as I need to know, but sometimes, late at night, in the particular quiet that comes after a house settles and the last sound you registered was a sound you can't quite place, I think about that ellipsis, that 2, that empty page, and I wonder what the first one said.